Welcome back to our lecture series. My name is Gregor Weiss. I'm a professor of finance here at Leipzig University, and we will continue our discussion on carbon finance. There's a crucial distinction in carbon markets that people constantly confuse, and getting it clear will save you a lot of muddle. Compliance markets versus voluntary markets. Compliance markets are the ones we discussed last time, like the European Union ETS. They are mandated by regulation. Firms are legally required to hold capped tradable allowances. The market is large and liquid, and it produces a real binding carbon price that firms cannot escape. Voluntary markets are completely different in character. Here, firms and individuals choose to buy carbon credits to offset their emissions. Nobody forces them. These credits come from specific projects like planting forests or building renewables that claim to have avoided or removed carbon somewhere. The voluntary market is tiny by comparison, only around $2 billion. And crucially, its central problem is quality and integrity. Is a credit you buy actually worth a real ton of carbon dioxide? In the compliance market, a ton is a ton by law. In the voluntary market, a ton is only as good as the project behind it. And as we're about to see, many of those projects don't hold up. Let's confront that integrity problem head on, because it triggered one of the biggest scandals in climate finance. An offset is a credit representing 1 ton of carbon dioxide, supposedly avoided or removed somewhere else. The largest registry certifying these voluntary credits is Verra, which runs the Verified Carbon Standard. Now, in 2023, a major joint investigation by The Guardian, the German newspaper Die Zeit, and others delivered a devastating finding. Around 90% of Verra's rainforest protection offsets were likely phantom credits. That is, they didn't represent real additional emission reductions at all. 90%. Think about what that means. Companies had been buying these credits to claim carbon neutrality when the underlying reductions largely didn't exist. Why does this happen? 4 deep problems plague offsets. Additionality. Would the forest have been protected anyway, even without the credit? Baselines. You're measuring against a hypothetical what would have happened, which is easy to game. Permanence. A forest can burn down or be logged next year, releasing the carbon again. And double counting, the same ton being claimed by 2 different parties. In response, the industry has tried to rebuild trust with new core carbon principles from a body called the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market and stricter standards. But the episode was a genuine crisis. It exposed that a large part of the voluntary offset market was effectively selling hot air. Let's step back and weigh emissions trading in the round, because it's neither a miracle nor a fraud. It's a tool with real strengths and real weaknesses. On the advantages side, it harnesses market forces to find cuts cost efficiently. It has low administrative cost compared with micromanaging every firm. It creates individual accountability, since each firm must answer for its own emissions. And firms can even pre-finance investments against expected carbon revenue. Those are genuine virtues, but the disadvantages are equally real. Carbon revenue is uncertain because the price moves. The price can collapse, as the early ETS showed, if allowances are oversupplied or a recession cuts demand. Carbon is intangible, which creates fraud risk. You can't see a ton of avoided carbon, which invites exactly the phantom credit problems we just discussed. And the effect on actual emissions can be weak if the cap is set too loosely or riddled with loopholes. So the honest verdict is, emissions trading is a powerful mechanism, but only when it's designed with a tight cap, robust monitoring, and genuine political commitment. The mechanism is sound. The politics of implementation is where it usually fails. Here's some genuinely encouraging evidence that cap and trade can work spectacularly well. A natural experiment from before the climate era. Sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides are pollutants from burning fossil fuels. They cause acid rain and smog. In the United States, 2 early cap and trade systems targeted them. The acid rain program for sulfur dioxide, launched in 1995, and the nitrogen in 1995, and the nitrogen oxides budget trading program in 2003. And the results were a triumph. They cut pollution far more cheaply than anyone had predicted, proving that markets genuinely can deliver environmental goals at low cost. That's the headline lesson. But there's a fascinating finance twist from research by Dang, Gao, and Yu in 2022. They found that when the nitrogen oxides price suddenly rose, affected manufacturers responded by adopting more conservative capital structures, taking on less debt because the added regulatory cost raised their operating leverage and their risk of financial distress. Read that carefully because it's a deep point. Climate policy doesn't just change emissions, it reshapes companies' core financial decisions: how much debt they carry, how much risk they take. A carbon price ripples all the way into the corporate balance sheet. That's the kind of connection that makes carbon finance such a rich field. That takes us to Part C, carbon risk in asset prices. We've seen how carbon gets priced by regulators. Now we ask a different and more subtle question, one that goes to the heart of finance. If climate policy imposes real costs on carbon-intensive firms, do financial markets see it coming? Is that risk already sitting in stock and bond prices today, or are markets asleep to it? This is where climate meets asset pricing, and the evidence is genuinely fascinating. First, let's define carbon risk cleanly, because it has two very different faces. The first is transition risk, the risk that the world's response to climate change, policy like carbon pricing, technology shifts like cheap renewables, and changing market and consumer preferences, hammers carbon-intensive firms. An oil company doesn't need a hurricane to lose value, it just needs a carbon tax, or a collapse in the cost of solar. Need a hurricane to lose value. It just needs a carbon tax, or a collapse in the cost of solar, or investors deciding to shun it. That's transition risk, the risk of the transition itself. The second face is physical risk, the direct damage a changing climate does to assets and operations, the floods, storms, and heat waves we studied at length in the banking and insurance chapters. Both are real, but they behave very differently and hit different firms. And the open question that drives all the research we're about to see is deceptively simple to state. Are these risks already reflected in today's asset prices or not yet? Because if they're not yet fully priced, then a great repricing still lies ahead, and that has enormous implications for every investor. Let's see what the evidence says. Let's recap. Compliance markets, like the ETS, produce a real binding price. Voluntary offset markets are small and plagued by an integrity crisis, with the Verra scandal exposing that around 90% of some rainforest credits were phantom. Emissions trading is powerful, but only with a tight cap and honest monitoring. And the United States acid rain and nitrogen oxides programs proved markets can cut pollution cheaply, while even reshaping corporate financial decisions. And we've now framed carbon risk, transition, and physical, with the central question, is it priced or not yet? In the next video, we dig into exactly that, with the evidence on the carbon premium, tail risk, and stranded assets. See you there.